Alright, so we're back. This time we're going to talk about the excretory system of the higher vertebrates. Specifically, we're going to talk about the kidney. The kidney is a fairly complex organ, so we're going to take this kind of slow, working our way through it, and then try to put it all together here at the end. Basically the vertebrate excretory system, can't spell kidney, vertebrate excretory system, we're talking about kidneys. Now, in addition to being involved with the excretory system, that is ridding the body of nitrogenous waste, the kidneys are also intimately involved with salt balance and water regulation. So let's go ahead and take a look here. And I think everybody knows where these things are oriented, but you've got a couple of kidneys here. Here is a section of the kidney here to show us that blood is going to be moved through the kidneys, and it's the blood that's going to be filtered to produce the filtrate. So blood arrives at the kidney from what's referred to as the renal artery. Blood then moves through the kidney, we'll talk more about this, and then blood is collected out here at the renal vein and then returned back to the heart. So major arteries supplying both of these kidneys, the renal arteries, and then blood is collected from the kidneys through the renal veins. Okay? All right, the filtrate itself is going to go through just exactly what we went through with these other excretory systems. Once the filtrate's been produced through filtration, then we're going to go through a reabsorption step, a secretion step, and finally an excretion step. In the kidneys, we're basically going to be collecting the material to be excreted here in these collecting ducts. The collecting ducts then come together to form larger and larger vessels, which eventually get us to this very large structure here, the ureter, and the ureters then move to the urinary bladder, and then the urine is expelled from the urinary bladder through the urethra. Okay? So we're going to be doing filtration, reabsorption, secretion, and then finally excretion out through the ureter and ultimately the urethra. Okay? All right, the kidney itself, in this section we can see this very well, is divided into two main sections. So we have this kind of kidney bean shaped structure, but notice that there's really an outer portion of this here. This is called the renal cortex. Anytime you see the prefix renal, think kidney. And anytime you see cortex, we're talking about the outermost portion or outer layers of something, right? Cortex of the cerebrum, renal cortex. And then we have this area in here, right, which is called the medulla. Okay, and then we could, if we wanted to, delineate two parts of the renal medulla based on how things look. So there's a darker colored area and then a lighter colored area. The darker colored area is the outer medulla, so that's outer medulla, and then we would have this lighter color which represents the inner medulla. Okay? All right. Now, within the kidney itself, we have the pieces that do the work. Okay, they're doing the majority of the work within the kidney. And we refer to these as the functional units of the kidney. Kind of like we refer to the functional units of the nervous system as neurons. The functional units of the kidney are called nephrons. Again, when you see the prefix renal, think kidney, but also when you see nephro or nephros, think kidney as well. All right, so here is a schematic of one of these nephrons. I think I have one here that's untangled, so we can see it a little easier. Right, so there's the vessel coming ultimately from the renal artery, and then this vein here is going to collect with other veins to form the renal vein. And then this individual piece in kind of a yellowish white, kind of a tan color, here, this long tube all around, that's what's referred to as a nephron. All tangled up here with capillaries. Let's take those off and just look at the organization of a nephron. And what we're going to do is organize it in a very specific way. We have a part here where the filtration comes from, and then we have what's referred to as a proximal tubule, then a descending limb, here descending limb, an ascending limb, and a distal convoluted tubule, followed by the collecting duct. Okay? So the location where filtration occurs, and I'll go into this in more detail here in a second. Get a better marker here. Bowman's capsule is where filtration occurs. And then we have this proximal convoluted tubule, followed by the descending limb, followed by the ascending limb, and then here, the distal convoluted tubule, and then that goes into a collecting duct. Okay? Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb, ascending limb, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct. So the filtrate, I think should be fairly obvious here, but the filtrate is moving in this direction through this nephron. And then also here, the descending limb and ascending limb together are part of what's called the loop of Henle. Okay, now the fact that we break the nephron into these different segments should suggest that there are different things going on in these different segments, right? And that would be correct to say that. So as we move through this nephron, we'll be using these individual pieces separately, and then we'll kind of talk about what's going on kind of collectively through this nephron, okay? Before we get into the kind of the nitty-gritty here of these nephrons and how they function, it's worth mentioning that there are basically two types of nephrons. And the nephrons differ from each other based on this loop of Henle and how far down into the medulla that loop of Henle goes. So there are some nephrons, like this one here, where Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb, ascending limb, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. Notice that that portion here, this loop of Henle, doesn't penetrate very far into the renal medulla. Okay? This type of nephron is called a cortical nephron. Okay. Cortical nephron, because the nephron is basically located in the cortex of the kidney. That's where it is. On the other hand, in birds and mammals, this other type of nephron occurs within vertebrate kidneys. This one, notice that the loop of Henle drops way down into this renal medulla. Okay, we still have the Bowman's capsule, proximal, descending limb, ascending limb, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct, but that loop of Henle penetrates very far into the renal medulla. This is called a juxtamedullary nephron. And I think I mentioned here, worth writing it down, that mammals and birds are the ones that, in addition to the cortical nephrons, also have these juxtamedullary nephrons. Okay? Just checking my notes here. Okay? All right. All right. Let's go ahead and start into these individual pieces then. What we're going to do is start with that first part of the nephron, which is Bowman's capsule, talk a little bit what happens there, and then move our way through into the proximal convoluted tubule and then the loop of Henle, et cetera, et cetera. So let's start here in Bowman's capsule. Okay? All right, so Bowman's capsule, let's take a look at this organization first. Take a look at a couple slides. There's Bowman's capsule right there. Notice that the artery here is providing blood that then moves into Bowman's capsule. Okay? Here again, blood coming into Bowman's capsule. So that means by the time we get to this image, we're just looking here at Bowman's capsule. Okay, that if we're looking at it from the outside, that's all we would see is this structure, which is the capsule. Inside that capsule is this weird folding and branching of the artery. Right, the artery, I guess I should call it an arteriole because it's very small. The folding and branching of this arteriole, this is called the glomerulus. So Bowman's capsule itself is this structure, and then within that capsule, this kind of convoluted, right, folding back and forth of that arteriole, this is called the glomerulus. Okay? So we've got a certain amount of blood coming in through this arteriole. The blood coming into Bowman's capsule here, I would call this an afferent arteriole. And that means that this vessel that blood is leaving the glomerulus through would be an efferent arteriole. Classic biology, right? Two words that sound pretty much the same way if you're not careful with your pronunciation. So, afferent arteriole, efferent arteriole. Okay, so the afferent arteriole carries blood into the glomerulus, and then the blood leaves the glomerulus through this efferent arteriole. Okay, blood coming in through the afferent, leaving through the efferent. That means that this entire structure, Bowman's capsule plus the glomerulus, together is going to be called a renal corpuscle. Okay, renal corpuscle. All right, now let's take a look at these vessels that make up the glomerulus, because they're kind of odd. They're very odd. It's an arteriole. We aren't at capillaries because what's leaving is an arteriole. If this were a venous system, I'd be tempted to call that a capillary. But because this is all arteriole, we're looking at some kind of weird structural adaptations to these arterioles to allow them to participate in filtration. Basically, what we're going to do is take the blood that's moving through these arterioles, and we're going to use those arterioles to do the filtration. So just as we did with the other animals we looked at, one of the things we could do with this arteriole is put holes in it. Right? These holes are called fenestrations. Same language we used with capillaries, even though these are arterioles. The fenestrations, fenetra in Latin means, or I should say fenestra in Latin means window. Fenetra in French means window. These are windows on the arteriole. They're holes. And these holes right here, right, they're little fenestrations that stuff can come out of. Okay? All right. Now, laying over the top of these fenestrated arterioles, right, are these weird modified cells called podocytes. So sitting over the top of these arterioles are podocytes. Okay? These podocytes also have fenestrations, but they're not windows, they're more slits. So you can see this kind of stitch work that separates the two cells from each other. There's a nucleus of a podocyte, there's a nucleus of a podocyte, there's the membrane of the two cells coming together, and where they come together are these filtration slits. So the idea is blood comes in through these arterioles under pressure, and stuff gets squeezed out through these fenestrations and then through these filtration slits. Okay? Right now, the language. Because we're moving into a kind of a capillary area where the capillaries occur, you could refer to this as arterial capillary. I think in one of these images they kind of do that. Yeah, glomerular capillary. I think because this anatomy is very similar to the anatomy you'd find in a capillary, that this would be considered as part of a capillary bed. There's some debate about that, and I think it all comes down to the way you define things. For me, this is more arterial than a capillary bed. We'll see later the main part of the capillary bed is this part down here associated with the loop of Henle. But I'm okay either way. You could call this a glomerular capillary, or you could call it an arteriole, right? This is all kind of our arterial stuff in here, even though we could consider it as being part of the glomerulus. Okay? Is that all right? I'm all right either way. Okay? All right, so we have this blood moving in under pressure. Blood is filtered, and that means what's now in Bowman's capsule is filtrate, right? What